We're going to talk about working up a load for a rifle. I chose to talk about a particular cartridge. It's been one of the most popular cartridges of all times. That's the 300 Weatherby. I've shot a 300 Weatherby since 1968, and I've built many 300 Weatherbys for people over the years. And I've come to the conclusion over a lot of years of working up loads for this particular cartridge, just like I have other cartridges, that there are powders that work better than other powders. There are bullets that work better than other bullets in the accuracy department. And there are primers that seem to dictate the situation at hand, just like it does with any cartridge. This cartridge is no different than any other cartridge. And we're going to concentrate here on pretty much 3 different powders. When I started shooting the 300 Weatherby, we didn't have much of a choice for powders. We had IMR 4350 and Hodgson's 4831. I've used both. I used a lot of 4831 over the years, some 4350. As time has gone by, we've had other powders that have come out. Somewhere around 30 years ago, we finally become available to us, IMR 7828. After that, Hodgson's H1000. H1000, they've chose that as a designation to load in 30 caliber 1,000 yard cartridges. Well, I'm going to narrow this down to Hodgson's 4831, 7828, and H1000. It's my contention, and people that understand, that the better that you fill a cartridge case with powder, the better your performance will be. And the slower burning powder builds pressure slower than a faster burning powder. It should be quite obvious. 4831 is a slow burning powder. 7828 is a slower burning powder than 4831, and H1000 is a slower burning powder than the other two. So it only stands to reason that we use a little bit more of the slower powder than we do of the powder that's faster. And I've had people remark to me, well, you've got to use more powder. Yeah, and you get more velocity with more powder and less pressure. This is what people don't seem to have a grasp of. Very often, a person will pick a powder that's invariably so much on the quicker side, even a powder quicker than the powders that I'm mentioning, and start loading those powders. Now you might get accuracy, but you simply build pressure quicker. Now, we're talking about pressure, so we need to have an understanding here to some extent about pressure. I've got a virgin cartridge case, 300 Weatherby cartridge case here. This case has not been run into a die, it hasn't been touched in any way, it's right out of the box. I've got a 1 inch Starrett micrometer here that reads in 1/10,000th of an inch. And I adopted Vernon Spear's method of measuring pressure that Vernon came up with, got to be 60 some years ago now. He determined that if you measured the case head as your work loads up, when you got to a point that you started to expand the case head, that would give you an idea of where you were on pressure. Well, it was determined many years ago by Vernon Spear, who started Spear Bullet Company, world renowned, that if you measure this cartridge head with this micrometer before you fire it and after you fire it, to see if the brass is starting to expand a little bit. Now here's where I measure. I'm going to set this micrometer up. I measure right on the rear half of the belt. You see, folks, where this micrometer is? This case happens to measure 528. Now right here on the rim, it measures 526. That means to you and I that this micrometer will clear the rim and actually measure the belt. You don't measure way up here on the belt, such as this, because there are burrs. When this case is formed, there are burrs where that belt is formed on this cartridge case. And as the case expands, it's going to be larger up on this part of the belt here than it is on the very rear part of the belt, just as it drops off into the extractor groove. This is where you need to measure your case head. Right there on the belt with your 1/10 micrometer. You write that reading down. And as you work up your loads, each time you fire a different load, and every time you fire, let's say you're shooting 3-shot groups, you measure all 3 cases and you pay attention. You write these things down. And this case right now is 528. Well, let's say that we've worked up a load. Let's just happen to pick H1000. And we're using a particular charge. And let's say that on the target that we're getting 1¼ groups on the target. Well, what we happen to be using at the time was H1000. Let's just say, for instance, we're using a 180 grain Nosler long range AccuBond bullet. And we're using a Federal 215 Magnum primer. We've run these loads over the chronograph, and we've chronographed these loads, and we've got a velocity spread of around 40 feet a second. Well, that's a fairly large velocity spread, not tremendously large, but a fairly large velocity spread. That right there tells me, through years and years of experience with that type of velocity spread, and having measured the case and found that the case is not expanding back there on the head at all, that I can go up in my charge. We've got a velocity spread of about 40. That means that we're going to have a standard deviation there somewhere, maybe up in the high teens, around 20. And standard deviation is just simply an average of the shots that are fired. And anyway, so we go back to the loading bench. We add a 1/2 grain of powder. We were shooting 1¼ groups. Now, that 1/2 grain of powder, tighten that group up, say 3/10 of an inch. Well, we know we're headed in the right direction. We measure our case, and we find that we still have no expansion going on there on the case head. So we're still loading well within the safe area of where we need to be loading these cartridges. Let's do the same thing. We're shooting 180 grain Nosler AccuBond in this particular rifle. Let's say that the rounds are loaded to 3 and 600 long. Most all of our Magnum actions that'll accept the 300 Weatherby will allow a round loaded to 3 and 600 long. We keep that loaded round length. We still are using the Federal 215 primer. Let's going up our charge another 1/2 grain. And we pay attention to our velocity spread, we pay attention to our accuracy, and we pay attention to case expansion. All of these things are part of accuracy and part of precision hand loading. And by simply upping that powder charge another 1/2 grain, now we've went to tightening up from the previous group that we fired. Now we're right down there around 7/10 of an inch. We've tightened up that group now with upping that charge several times. From 1¼ groups, we've tightened it up to 3/4 inch groups. But now this time, we picked up just a little bit of expansion. Let's say that we picked up 2/10,000ths of an inch expansion. So that means that the case measures 528 2. 0.5282 is what this case head measures. Well, these Magnum cases will allow easily 1/2 of a thousandth of case head expansion. So this tells us we still got room to go. So everything else being the same, we've upped the powder charge again another 1/2 of a grain. This time, our accuracy, we've got a group that's a 440 group. We measure the case head. We've got 5/10,000ths. That's a 1/2 of a thousand of case head expansion. This means that we've reached basically the maximum acceptable pressure level with the rifle and the loads that we're using. We've got extremely good accuracy, as I just mentioned, and in this process of things, now we've got a velocity spread that's only like 12. We've got a standard deviation of 4 or 5. We started out with a velocity spread of 40, and as we've gradually worked up with this load, with this particular rifle, now here we are with this tight standard deviation, tremendously good group. Now, is this as good as it will do? Well, maybe, maybe not. The thing that I would do here at this point in time, I'd prove whether it was as good as we could do. We're going to stay with the same powder charge, we're going to stay with the same bullet seating depth, but we're going to switch to a different primer. We're going to stick still with a Federal primer, but now we're going to go with a Federal 215 match primer. Match meaning that probably that lot of primers, it runs more consistent for match accuracy than the standard 215 primer. We'll try that primer, everything else being equal. And we shoot another 3-shot string. We measure for case expansion, we measure velocity, standard deviations, and our standard deviation stayed just about the same. And let's say, for instance, that our accuracy was, instead of a 440 group, let's say that we shot a 430 group. Well, it didn't change much. Well, what do? Well, the thing that I would do, I would leave everything else the same except for the primer, because we're only changing one thing at a time here so that we know what works. The next thing that I would try, I'll go to just slightly a milder primer than the Federal 215 Magnum match primer or the Federal 215 primer. I'll go to a Federal 210 match primer. That's still a pretty powerful primer, but here we are again. Now we've narrowed it down to match primer. Now we run these over the 3-shot string over the chronograph, and this is where we're at. And our accuracy went from 430. Now it went down to 3/8 of an inch. That's 0.375 from 430. Well, I think we've done probably just about as good as we can do with what we've worked with. We're using the H1000. We've started, a couple grains lower than where maybe the maximum listed charge might happen to be. We've worked our load up, and we've changed nothing else but charge weights and primers. Well, I don't think that we're probably going to better that, but there are other primers out there. There's the CC Magnum primer, large rifle Magnum primer, CCI large rifle Magnum primer, and there's the large rifle Winchester large rifle primer. Now this cartridge case doesn't have a big enough case capacity, in my opinion and from my experience, to use a Winchester Magnum primer. Those are designed for bigger cases like a 30 by 378 Weatherby. That's the primer we'd want to use with that particular case, because it burns about 20 more grains of powder to give you about the same velocity as the 300 Weatherby does, which makes it considerably inefficient. But if you want to, try that CCI Magnum primer. Try the standard Winchester large rifle primer. All these primers that I described are fairly close to one another, but one's a little hotter than the other, or one is a little bit more precision from lot to lot than the others. Go ahead and try them. Maybe it'll help you, maybe it won't, but you won't know unless you try. But the main ingredients being those components: the 1-inch micrometer that reads in 10,000ths of an inch, and your chronograph, and your accuracy on the target. This is what you pay attention to. And anybody that has these tools can basically do what I'm doing. And I'm explaining what I do with every rifle that I build, that I have to work up loads for, or rifles for myself, whatever. This is the routine that I go through. And I might have to go through 3 powders. I may have to go through all those primers. And I might have to go through, 3 or 4 different bullets and bullet designs and bullet manufacturer to get that rifle. Not every rifle, just because you or I decide, well, I want this rifle, I want to shoot this bullet. Well, fine, go ahead and shoot it. But the rifle may not shoot up to the accuracy potential that you're expecting. That doesn't mean that the rifle's bad, that it's an inaccurate rifle. It does not mean that there's anything wrong with the bullets. It just means that rifle, and that rifle barrel, and the loads that you're giving it with that particular bullet, it's not digesting it in the fashion that it's giving you the accuracy that maybe you're expecting. So if we go kind of just a little bit further here with this to do with accuracy, people have the crazy notion, because they come to me or they come to somebody else and they have a match quality stainless steel barrel from a known manufacturer, such as Hart or Bartlein or maybe Liljer or Snyder or somebody like that, that the rifle's automatically going to shoot sub-half minute of angle groups right off the bat. It doesn't work like that, folks. You have to go through the process, the hand loading process, all the details to get this type of accuracy. And at some point in time, if I find that the rifle just isn't responding like I think it ought to respond, one of the things that I do very, very often, I'll switch bullet manufacturers. I'll go like from that 180 grain Nosler Accubon, which is a boat tail type bullet. I'll switch to somebody's flat base bullet. Like for instance, 180 grain Sierra bullet, 180 grain Hornady bullet that's a flat base bullet. Because maybe that particular rifle, this rifle barrel, doesn't like boat tail type bullets. Maybe it likes flat base bullets. And another aspect that I have awful good luck with a lot of times, but I've been through these various things that I'm detailing to you, is switch to even another type of a bullet. And that is a Barnes X triple shot bullet. Almost always I find that those bullets will just about outshoot anybody else's bullet in a lot of situations. In 30 caliber, 180 grains Barnes X triple shot bullets shoot absolutely outstandingly. And I find also that, like if we go to 270 calibers, they're 270 caliber bullets. Barnes bullets shoot absolutely tremendous. I'm talking about groups that'll shoot down there sub 0.3 of a minute of angle groups in a lot of situations. So I'm detailing a lot of information here. You got a lot to listen to, but you need to listen to every detail, not just pick one detail out of here. All these details is what makes up a load that allows this rifle to perform and shoot like you think that it ought to shoot. if you've invested, thousands of dollars in a rifle and you like to reload and so forth, the only way that you're going to get the potential out of that rifle, the rifle is built correctly, it's got quality components, it's been done correctly by myself or somebody else that knows what they're doing. The rifle theoretically ought to perform somewhere in that half-inch neighborhood in the way of accuracy, or perhaps better, maybe even half that. I have occasional rifles, even 300 Weatherbys, that I shoot 1/4 inch groups with simply load workup. That started out shooting 1.25 inch, 1.5 group, but with all these details, I've got to the point where I've wrung what I could out of that rifle. And the other thing that I do, after I've been through all these details and we've got to the point where this particular load workup went with this particular rifle in 300 Weatherby, I'll go to 300-yard target. And that rifle that shot a 3/8 inch group, theoretically, because we've increased the yardage 3 times, that ought to shoot a group basically 3 times 375 or somewhere around that if it's maintaining true accuracy. And lots of times it will, occasionally it won't. Well, in that instance, then maybe we need to try something else. Maybe we need to try a little bit of adjusting our bullet seating depth, but still shooting at 300 yards. Let's say that the rifle, instead of shooting a group that was 3 times, it was shooting about 4 times 375, which would be 1.5 inch group at 300 yards. Well, we're not looking for that. We were looking for, a group that was tighter than that. We were looking for 1 1/8 inch group, if it was maintaining its accuracy. And let's say that we seat that bullet another 10 thousandths deeper or something like that, and bingo, that group that was 1.5 inch at 300 yards, now it is shooting down there right around that 1.8 inch group at 300 yards. Well, that's probably about as good as you can do, folks. So this is what you need to follow. Whatever cartridge you're loading, follow these techniques and the information that I'm presenting to you, and I think that'll be very helpful in any of your future endeavors loading for your rifle.